The champagne flute shattered against the marble floor of the gallery, spraying golden liquid across my father's custom Italian shoes. He didn't even flinch. His eyes, cold, dismissive, the same eyes that had looked through me for 26 years, remained fixed on the canvas before him. Amateur, he said, the word dropping like a stone into still water. Derivative, technically proficient perhaps, but utterly lacking in soul. Around us, the charity auction continued its glittering dance. Manhattan's elites circulated through the green gallery, their laughter a champagne bubble soundtrack to my humiliation. My painting, 6 months of work, every brushstroke a piece of my heart, hung on the wall like a convicted criminal awaiting execution. Richard, really, my stepmother Clarissa murmured, her hand on his arm. Not in my defense. Never in my defense. Her touch was proprietary, a reminder that she owned him now, just as she owned my half-sister Vivian, who stood beside her smirking into her phone. No, Clarissa. Elena needs to hear this. My father turned to me then, and I saw something worse than anger in his face. I saw pity. You've wasted enough time on this hobby. You're 26 years old. It's time to accept reality. You're not an artist. You never will be. The gallery seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of a nearby pedestal, my fingers leaving prints on the pristine white surface. This was supposed to be my moment, my first major showing. The painting, Metamorphosis in Blue, had been accepted into the gallery's emerging artists collection. It wasn't much, but it was everything to me. The brushwork is childish, my father continued, warming to his subject now. A small crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the scent of drama like sharks to blood. The composition is chaotic. The color theory is all wrong. Look at this. He gestured dismissively at the canvas. This muddy attempt at chiaroscuro, it's painful to look at. I wanted to speak, to defend myself, to explain that the chaos was intentional, that the muddy shadows represented the confusion of transformation, that every choice had been deliberate and thought through. But my throat had closed. My vision was tunneling. Dad, I managed. Just that one word spoken so quietly I wasn't sure he'd heard it, but he had. He turned back to me, and for just a moment, less than a heartbeat, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Guilt? Regret? Then it was gone, replaced by that terrible, immovable certainty. I'm doing you a favor, Elena. Someone needs to tell you the truth. You have no talent. You never did. Your mother filled your head with foolish dreams, and I've indulged them long enough. It's time to grow up. My mother. He'd brought up my mother, the woman who'd died when I was 7, leaving me alone with a man who'd remarried within a year, who'd had a new daughter within 2, who'd systematically erased every trace of her from our lives except for one thing, the art supplies she'd given me on my 6th birthday. The paints are magic, mija, she'd whispered, kissing my forehead. When you use them, you put your soul on the canvas. Never forget that. I'd painted every day since her death, through my father's remarriage, through Clarissa's cold disdain, through Vivian's casual cruelty, through boarding schools and summer camps and college visits where my father never once asked to see my portfolio. Painting was the only thing that made me feel close to her, the only thing that felt like mine. And now he was taking that too. I think we should leave, Clarissa said, her voice honey-sweet with false concern. Elena clearly needs some time to process this. Vivian, darling, get your sister's coat. I'm not her sister, Vivian said, not looking up from her phone. And I'm not her keeper. The crowd had grown larger. I recognized faces. Art critics, gallery owners. The woman from Sotheby's who'd expressed interest in my work last month. They were all watching, all listening, all witnessing the destruction of everything I'd built. My father reached into his jacket and pulled out his wallet. For one wild moment, I thought he was going to buy the painting, to show some gesture of support, however grudging. Instead, he peeled off several $100 bills and pressed them into my hand. Take this, get yourself something nice, maybe a new outfit for job interviews. I'll have my secretary send you some listings. There's an opening in accounts receivable at one of my firms. Entry level, but it's a start. The money felt obscene in my palm. Blood money, pity money. I don't want, I started. Don't be stubborn, Elena. This is for your own good. He turned away, and Clarissa and Vivian fell into formation beside him, a perfect family unit from which I had always been excluded. Learn from this. Not everyone can be an artist. There's no shame in being ordinary. They left. The crowd dispersed, conversations resuming in hushed tones. I stood alone before my painting, my failure, my shame. The gallery owner, Mr. Green himself, approached cautiously as if I might shatter like the champagne flute. "Miss Castellanos," he said gently, "I'm sorry you had to experience that. For what it's worth, I think your father is wrong. This painting has real merit." I couldn't speak, couldn't look at him, couldn't do anything but stare at the canvas, seeing it now through my father's eyes. Childish, derivative, amateur. However, Mr. Green continued, and my heart sank further. Given the unfortunate scene, I think it might be best if we remove the piece from the collection. Bad publicity, you understand. I'm sure you understand. I understood. I understood perfectly. I walked out of the gallery into the November rain. I walked for hours, the money still clutched in my hand, my vision blurred by tears and water. I walked until my feet bled through my gallery shoes. I walked until I found myself on the Brooklyn Bridge. The water below was dark and cold and welcoming. I thought of my mother. I thought of 26 years of trying to be enough, trying to be seen, trying to matter. I thought of my father's eyes, cold and dismissive and final. I climbed onto the railing. The fall was longer than I expected, long enough to regret, long enough to remember my mother's face, her smile, her hands guiding mine across a canvas. Long enough to think, this isn't how it should have ended. The water was exactly as cold as I'd imagined. And then, I was 7 years old, standing in my mother's studio, watching her paint. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I gasped, stumbled, and caught myself against the doorframe. My hands were small, unmarked by years of turpentine and paint stains. My hair, falling into my eyes, was shorter, lighter, the way it had been before I'd started dyeing it darker in college. "Mija?" My mother turned, and the sight of her face, alive, healthy, radiant, nearly dropped me to my knees. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." A ghost, yes, I'd seen a ghost, my own. "Mama," I whispered, and she was there, kneeling before me, her hands warm on my shoulders. "Bad dream?" she asked, brushing my hair back from my forehead. "Not a dream, a memory, a life, a death." I was back. Somehow, impossibly, I was back. The implications crashed over me like waves. If I was 7, then my mother had 6 months left to live. The aneurysm would take her suddenly, without warning, in late spring. My father would remarry by the following winter. Clarissa would move into our house by the new year. Vivian would be born 2 years later. And I would spend the next 19 years being slowly, systematically destroyed by people who should have loved me. Unless I changed it. "Elena?" My mother's voice was concerned now. "You're scaring me, baby. What's wrong?" I looked at her, really looked at her. At the paint smudges on her cheeks, at the silver pendant around her neck, the one shaped like a paintbrush that I'd kept in a box for 19 years before pawning it for rent money, at her eyes, which were my eyes, which were full of love and worry and life. "Nothing's wrong," I said, and I meant it. "Everything's gonna be okay now, Mama. I promise." She smiled, confused but reassured, and went back to her painting. I stayed in the doorway, watching her work, memorizing every detail. The way she held her brush, the confidence of her strokes, the fearlessness in her color choices. I had been reborn with a gift more precious than gold. I knew the future. I knew what was coming. I knew who would hurt me and how and when, and I knew exactly how to stop it. The next 6 months were the most painful and precious of my existence. I spent every possible moment with my mother, soaking up her presence, her teachings, her love. She taught me techniques I'd spent years trying to master in my previous life, glazing, scumbling, the perfect way to capture light on water. She taught me about composition and negative space, and the importance of trusting your instincts. Art isn't about perfection, mija, she said one afternoon as we painted side by side in her studio. It's about truth, about taking what's inside you and putting it on the canvas. The technique will come with practice, but the soul has to be there from the beginning. I absorbed everything. Not just her lessons, but her philosophy, her approach, her fierce belief that art mattered, that it wasn't a hobby or a waste of time, but a vital, necessary expression of humanity. And I prepared. I found my mother's will hidden in a drawer in her studio. In my previous life, I'd never seen it. My father had handled everything after her death, and by the time I was old enough to ask questions, it was too late. But now, at 7, with the knowledge of a 26-year-old, I knew where to look. The will was clear. My mother's entire estate, including her substantial trust fund, her paintings, and most importantly, the intellectual property rights to her published works, was to be held in trust for me until I turned 18. My father was named as executor and trustee, but he was not the beneficiary. In my previous life, I'd received nothing. My father had claimed the money had been spent on my care, on boarding schools and art supplies and living expenses, and I'd believed him because what choice did I have? But now I knew better. Now I understood that he'd stolen from me, that he'd used my inheritance to fund his new life with Clarissa, that he'd taken what my mother had left for me and given it to his new daughter. Not this time. I made copies of the will. I hid them in places a 7-year-old might think were clever, inside book covers, taped to the bottom of drawers, in a waterproof bag buried in the garden. Places I could retrieve later when I was old enough to fight back. I also found something else in my mother's papers, evidence that she'd known something was wrong. Letters to her doctor about headaches, appointment cards, prescriptions for pain medication. She'd known. On some level, she'd known something was wrong, but she'd been too busy with her art, with me, with life, to pursue it aggressively. I wanted to tell her, to beg her to go to the hospital, to get a scan, to save herself. But I was 7. Who would listen to a 7-year-old claiming her mother was going to die? Instead, I did what I could. I had tantrums about her working too hard. I cried and clung to her and insisted she come to my school events instead of staying late in her studio. I made her rest. I made her slow down. It wasn't enough. The aneurysm took her on a Wednesday in April while I was at school. She'd been laughing at something on the phone. I learned this later. And then she'd simply collapsed. Gone before the ambulance arrived. I'd known it was coming. I'd prepared for it, and still it destroyed me. But this time, I wasn't alone in my grief. This time, I had a plan. At the funeral, my father was appropriately somber. He held my hand. He accepted condolences. He played the role of the grieving widower perfectly. I played my role too. The devastated daughter, the lost little girl. And I watched. I watched him talk to a blonde woman in the third row, someone I didn't recognize from my mother's friend group. I watched the way they looked at each other. I watched and I remembered. That was Clarissa. They'd been having an affair for 6 months. In my previous life, I'd learned this years later, overhearing a fight between them. Clarissa had thrown it in his face during an argument. I was there for you when Victoria was dying, and this is how you repay me? The words had haunted me. The implication that my mother had been dying slowly while they had been together, that her headaches and pain had been happening while my father had been sleeping with someone else. Now, watching them exchange glances over my mother's casket, I felt something crystallize inside me. Not just grief, not just anger, purpose. My father married Clarissa 8 months later. He claimed it was for my sake, that I needed a mother figure. Clarissa moved into our house with practiced ease, redecorating my mother's studio before the Christmas lights came down. I was 8 years old, with the mind of a 26-year-old, watching history repeat itself. Except this time, I was ready. I played the role they expected. The grieving daughter desperate for maternal affection, the confused child acting out, the lost little girl who needed guidance. Clarissa ate it up. She loved being needed, loved being the savior, loved being able to report to my father about how difficult I was, how damaged, how much work I required. She's obsessed with painting, Clarissa would say at dinner, her voice dripping with concern. It's not healthy, Richard. She needs to engage with other children, play sports, join clubs. This obsession with her mother's hobby is preventing her from moving on. My father would nod, looking troubled. We'll handle it gently, he'd say. Give her time. But I could see it in his eyes. The relief. He was glad I had someone else to manage me, glad he didn't have to deal with his daughter and his grief and the complications of single parenthood. When Vivian was born 2 years after my mother's death, the dynamic shifted completely. Suddenly, Clarissa had a baby of her own to focus on. Suddenly, I wasn't even a difficult child requiring attention. I was an inconvenience. The neglect started slowly. Forgotten permission slips. Missed parent-teacher conferences. My birthday celebrated a week late because it conflicted with Vivian's christening. I documented everything. Even at 9, 10, 11 years old, I kept journals. I saved emails I remembered. And I painted. God, how I painted. I used the techniques my mother had taught me. I practiced for hours every day, improving at a rate that would have seemed prodigious if anyone had been paying attention. But no one was. My father had written off my art as an unhealthy fixation. Clarissa saw it as a waste of time. And as Vivian grew older, she learned to mock what she didn't understand. Elena's in her room playing with paints again, she'd say, her voice dripping with disdain. She was only 5, but already she'd learned her mother's contempt perfectly. Let them think that. Let them dismiss me. I was building something they couldn't see, couldn't understand, couldn't touch. By the time I was 13, I was painting at a level that would have shocked any art teacher. But I kept my best work hidden. I submitted decent pieces for school assignments, good enough to pass, not good enough to attract attention. The masterpieces went into a storage unit I'd rented using my birthday money, under a false name, with forged parental permission. I was planning for a future they couldn't imagine. When I turned 14, my father informed me I'd be attending boarding school in Connecticut. It's for the best, he said, not meeting my eyes. You need structure, discipline, and frankly, Elena, your attitude toward Clarissa and Vivian has become unacceptable. My attitude, my crime was existing, taking up space, reminding him of my mother. Whatever you think is best, Dad, I said meekly. He looked surprised. He'd expected a fight. In my previous life, I'd given him one. I'd screamed and cried and begged to stay home. It had made no difference. This time, I smiled and packed my bags. Boarding school meant freedom. It meant art classes without supervision. It meant I could paint without Clarissa's disapproving looks or Vivian's mocking comments. It meant I could plan. The boarding school years were transformative. I threw myself into art with an intensity that alarmed my teachers. I took every advanced class available. I studied art history with religious fervor, paying special attention to the artists who'd been dismissed in their time, only to be vindicated by history. I learned about the art market, about galleries and auctions and collectors, about how reputations were built and destroyed, about the importance of provenance and narrative. And I painted. Piece after piece after piece. Not the tortured, emotional works of my previous life, but controlled, masterful compositions. I painted with my mother's techniques and my adult understanding of color theory, light, and form. By the time I was 16, I had a collection of over 50 paintings hidden in storage units across 3 states: landscapes, portraits, still lifes, abstract pieces, each one better than the last. I also began planning my revenge. In my previous life, I'd been passive. I'd accepted my father's neglect, Clarissa's cruelty, Vivian's mockery. I'd tried to earn their love through excellence, never realizing that they didn't want me to excel. They wanted me to disappear. This time, I understood the game, and I knew how to win. I created a pseudonym, V. Castellanos, close enough to my real name to amuse me, different enough to avoid immediate connection. I set up a website showcasing my work. I researched galleries that accepted unsolicited submissions. And then, at 17, I started selling. The first piece went to a small gallery in Boston for $3,000, a landscape of the Connecticut countryside, painted in the style of the Hudson River School, but with a modern sensibility. The gallery owner called it remarkably mature for an emerging artist. If only she knew. The money went into a bank account my father knew nothing about. an account that grew steadily as I sold piece after piece. Never in Manhattan, where my father might see. Never anywhere near my old life. By the time I turned 18, I had $200,000 in the bank and a growing reputation in regional art circles. I also had my mother's trust fund. On my 18th birthday, I walked into my father's office with a lawyer I'd retained using my art income. "Elena," my father said, looking up from his computer with barely concealed annoyance. "I'm busy. If this is about your college applications, it's about my mother's estate," I said calmly. He froze. For just a moment, I saw fear flicker across his face. Then his expression smoothed into patronizing concern. "Your mother's estate was used for your care, Elena. I've explained this. Boarding school is expensive. Your art supplies, My mother's estate was worth $2.3 million at the time of her death," I interrupted. "According to her will, it was to be held in trust until I turned 18, at which point full control would transfer to me." My father's face paled. "Elena, you don't understand. The market crash, the expenses—" "I have copies of the will," I said. "I have copies of the trust documents. I have records of every transaction you've made with those funds over the past 11 years. And unless you transfer every remaining penny to me within the next 48 hours, my lawyer will be filing criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud." The silence in the office was deafening. "You can't prove—" my father started. I pulled out a folder and set it on his desk. Inside were bank statements, transfer records, receipts, everything. My father had been careless with my inheritance, certain that I was too young, too traumatized, too busy grieving to ever check. He'd used my mother's money to fund his lifestyle with Clarissa, to buy her jewelry and vacations, to pay for Viviane's private schools and piano lessons and riding camps, to invest in his business ventures. "I've documented everything," I said, "every illegal transfer, every fraudulent expense. You've stolen from me for 11 years, Dad, and now you're going to pay it back." My father stared at the documents, his face cycling through shock, anger, and finally, calculation. "Elena," he said, his voice taking on a wheedling tone I'd never heard before. "You're upset, I understand, but we're family. We can work this out. You don't want to destroy your relationship with me, with Clarissa and Vivian, over money." "You're right," I said. "I don't want to destroy our relationship over money." I paused. "I want to destroy it because you stole my mother's legacy, because you erased her from our home, because you replaced her before she was cold in the ground, because you've spent 11 years making me feel worthless while spending her money on your new family." "Elena, 2 days, Dad. Transfer the money, or my lawyer files charges." I walked out of his office with my head high. Behind me, I heard him calling my name, then falling silent. He knew he was caught. He knew I had him. Within 48 hours, $1.7 million appeared in my account. Not the full amount. He'd spent too much, lost too much to market fluctuations and bad investments. But enough. More than enough. I didn't go to college. Not immediately. Instead, I disappeared. I traveled to Europe with my newfound wealth. I visited every major museum, studied every master. I painted in Florence, in Paris, in Amsterdam. I rented a studio apartment in Barcelona and worked for 16 hours a day, creating pieces that synthesized everything I'd learned, everything I'd experienced, everything I'd suffered. I painted my pain and my triumph, my grief and my resurrection, my mother's love and my father's betrayal, and I signed every piece, V. Castellanos. Within 2 years, V. Castellanos had gone from regional novelty to serious emerging artist. My work was featured in galleries across Europe. Critics called it hauntingly mature and emotionally resonant. Collectors started bidding against each other for pieces. I stayed anonymous, no photos, no interviews, no public appearances, just the work. The mystery added to my appeal. Who was V. Castellanos? Why the secrecy? What was the story behind these devastating, beautiful paintings? By the time I was 23, 3 years younger than I'd been when I died in my previous life, I'd sold over 200 paintings for a collective total of over $15 million. And I'd just received an invitation that would change everything. The Louvre wanted to meet me. 3 pieces, Monsieur Beaumont said, his fingers steepled in front of his face. We would like to acquire 3 pieces for our contemporary collection. We were sitting in a cafe in Paris, 2 blocks from the museum. I'd finally agreed to meet with them in person, though I'd maintained my anonymity by wearing a silk scarf and oversized sunglasses, claiming a skin condition that required me to avoid direct sunlight. It was ridiculous and dramatic, and they'd eaten it up. Artists were allowed to be eccentric. Which three? I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. The Louvre. The goddamn Louvre wanted to buy my paintings. Resurrection in Blue, he said, naming the piece I'd painted in Barcelona. The one that had started everything. It was my version of the painting my father had called amateur in my previous life. The same composition, the same vision, but executed with skill and maturity and truth. Mother's Legacy, he continued, naming the portrait I'd painted of my mother from memory, capturing her exactly as she'd been in her studio, paintbrush in hand, love in her eyes. And The Weight of Inheritance, he finished, naming the painting I'd created last year, a massive canvas depicting a young girl drowning under gold coins while a family watched from shore, counting their money. 3 paintings, 3 pieces of my soul, 3 perfect expressions of everything I'd lived through, died for, and been reborn to create. What are you offering? I asked, though I would have given them away for free. This wasn't about money. This was about vindication. He named a figure that made my vision blur. 2 million euros for 3 paintings. Done, I said. But I have one condition. Which is? The paintings will be displayed together in one room under the title The Castellanos Collection. And there will be a plaque explaining that these works were inspired by the artist's mother, Victoria Castellanos, a brilliant painter who died too young. Monsieur Beaumont smiled. That can be arranged, but may I ask, are you related to Victoria Castellanos? Her work has been gaining appreciation in recent years. I'm her daughter, I said. Everything I am, everything I create, I owe to her. His eyes widened with understanding. Then this must be my way of honoring her, I finished, of making sure she's remembered. He nodded. Then we are honored to help you do so. We shook hands, the contract would be drawn up, the paintings would be authenticated, the exhibition would be planned, and I would finally have my revenge. The exhibition was scheduled for the fall, 6 months away, plenty of time to plan. I returned to New York for the first time in 5 years. I'd kept tabs on my father and his family through social media and carefully placed Google alerts. I knew that his business had been struggling, that he'd lost several major clients, that Vivian was in college at NYU, studying business, planning to follow in his footsteps, that none of them had given me a single thought since I'd disappeared after taking my inheritance. Perfect. I rented a stunning apartment in Soho under my real name. I updated my social media profiles with photos from Europe, carefully curated to show success without revealing details. I wanted them to know I was back. I wanted them curious. And then I waited. It took 3 weeks for Vivian to reach out, a DM on Instagram, carefully casual. OMG, Elena, I saw you're back in NY. We should totally get coffee and catch up. I smiled at my phone. In my previous life, Vivian had been cruel in the careless way of someone who'd never been told no. She'd mocked my clothes, my interests, my art. She'd made her disdain clear, but now I had money, now I had status, now I was interesting. Would love to, I replied. How about Thursday at Sant Ambrosius? One of the most expensive cafes in Soho. Let her Google it. She agreed immediately. Vivienne arrived 15 minutes late, dressed in designer clothes that had been purchased with my mother's money. She was 20 now, beautiful in the way of people who'd never known hardship, her blonde hair perfect, her makeup flawless. She looked exactly like Clarissa. The resemblance made my stomach turn. Elena, she squealed, air-kissing both my cheeks. Oh my God, you look amazing! Europe obviously agreed with you. It did, I said calmly, gesturing for her to sit. How have you been? Oh, same old. School is crazy, Dad's been stressed about work, Mom's redecorating again. She rolled her eyes, inviting me to share in her exasperation with Clarissa's hobbies, as if I'd forgotten the way Clarissa had erased my mother from our home. That's nice, I said. What are you studying? Business administration. I'm planning to take over Dad's company someday. She said it with the confidence of someone who'd been promised the world and had no reason to doubt she'd receive it. That's ambitious, I said. Well, someone has to. The company's been struggling lately. Dad won't admit it, but I've seen the numbers. He's lost some major accounts. She leaned forward conspiratorially. Between you and me, I think he's finally getting too old for this. He needs fresh perspectives. Young blood. She was 20 years old and already planning to push her father aside. The irony was delicious. Speaking of which, Vivian continued, what have you been doing? I mean, I saw your posts from Europe, all those museums and galleries. Are you still painting? She said it delicately, as if asking about a terminal illness. I am, I said. Actually, I've been quite successful. Oh? Her interest sharpened. Like, you're selling stuff? Quite a lot of stuff, actually. That's great, Elena. Really great. She sipped her coffee and I could see the wheels turning. Could see her reassessing me, calculating my value. You know, Dad used to worry about you so much. He felt terrible when you left. He tried to find you, but you just disappeared. Lies, all lies. My father had been relieved when I left. One less complication in his perfect life. I needed space, I said. Time to find myself, to develop my craft. Well, you should come to dinner. Mom and Dad would love to see you. Bury the hatchet, you know, water under the bridge. She smiled brightly, and I saw Clarissa in that smile. Saw the calculation, saw the performance. They wanted something. My father's business was struggling, and suddenly his estranged daughter had money. I'd love that, I lied. Let me check my calendar. I have an exhibition coming up that's been consuming all my time. An exhibition? Where? I paused, letting the moment stretch. The Louvre. Vivian's coffee cup stopped halfway to her mouth. The Louvre? In Paris? Yes. Elena, that's incredible. That's like really incredible. Thank you. Dad is going to die when he hears this. He used to say, she stopped, catching herself. He used to say what? I asked, keeping my voice gentle. Nothing, just, he worried about you wasting your time. But obviously you've proved him wrong. This is amazing. When is it? October 15th. 3 of my paintings have been purchased for their permanent collection. I watched the information process, watched her do the math. Permanent collection. The Louvre. That meant money. Serious money. We are definitely celebrating this, Vivian declared. I'm hosting dinner next Friday. You have to come. I won't take no for an answer. I wouldn't miss it, I said, and meant every word. The dinner was at my father's house, my childhood home. The place where I'd grown up, where I'd painted with my mother, where I'd been slowly erased after her death. I stood on the doorstep in a vintage Dior dress and Louboutin heels, both purchased specifically for this moment, and took a breath. This was it, the beginning of the end. Vivian opened the door, her smile wide and performative. Elena, come in, come in. Everyone's so excited to see you. I stepped inside and felt the ghosts rise up to greet me. My mother's studio, now Clarissa's yoga room. The living room where we'd hung my mother's paintings, now decorated with mass-produced art from Home Goods. The dining room where I'd sat alone on my 10th birthday because they'd forgotten. Elena. My father stood at the end of the hallway. He'd aged in 5 years. His hair was grayer, his face more lined. He looked tired. Good. Dad, I said evenly. We stared at each other. 5 years of silence. 5 years of absence. In my previous life, this would have been the moment where I broke down, where I forgave, where I tried once more to earn his love. Not this time. You look well, he said finally. Europe suited you. It did. Vivian tells me you're having an exhibition at the Louvre. His voice was carefully neutral, but I could hear the question underneath. How? How did you achieve this? How did my failure of a daughter become someone the Louvre wants? 3 pieces in their permanent collection, I confirmed. Something flickered in his eyes, not pride, calculation. That's remarkable, Elena. Your mother would be proud. The casual invocation of my mother, the woman he'd replaced before she was cold in the ground, the woman whose memory he'd systematically erased from his home and his life, made my blood boil. But I kept my expression pleasant. Yes, I said softly. She would be. Everything I am, I owe to her. Elena! Clarissa swept into the hallway in a cloud of expensive perfume and false warmth. Darling, let me look at you. She took my hands, her grip firm and proprietary. My God, you're stunning. Europe has been so good to you. Hello, Clarissa, I said. Now no formality. You're home now, we're family. She linked her arm through mine with a familiarity that made my skin crawl. Come, dinner's ready. I've made all your favorites. She hadn't. She'd never known my favorites. She'd never cared to ask. Dinner was an elaborate production. Clarissa had hired caterers, set the table with my mother's china that should have been mine, and created an atmosphere of refined celebration. We sat, we ate, we made small talk, and I watched them perform. Clarissa playing the gracious hostess, Vivian playing the admiring sister, my father playing the proud parent, all of them waiting for the moment to strike, to ask for what they really wanted. It came with dessert. Elena, my father said, setting down his fork, I want to apologize. I raised my eyebrows. For what? For the way things ended between us. For not being more supportive of your art. I was wrong to discourage you. Clearly, you had talent I was too blind to see. There it was, the revision of history. In this version, he'd been wrong but well-intentioned. A concerned father, not a cruel tyrant. I appreciate that, I said, offering nothing more. The thing is, he continued, glancing at Clarissa, we've been thinking. Now that you're back, now that you've achieved such success, perhaps we could reconnect. Really reconnect. Be a family again. I'd like that, Clarissa added. I know we had our differences when you were younger, but you're an adult now. We can start fresh. Vivian nodded enthusiastically. It would be so great to have a sister again, especially one who's actually accomplished something. My friends would die when I tell them my sister has art in the Louvre. The subtext was clear. They wanted access to my success, to my connections, to my money. That sounds wonderful, I said, taking a sip of wine. Though I have to admit, I'm surprised. When I left 5 years ago after Dad transferred my mother's inheritance to me, I got the impression you all wanted nothing to do with me. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Elena, my father said carefully, that was a misunderstanding. You were young, upset, listening to lawyers who told me that you'd stolen $1.7 million from my mother's estate, I finished. Who showed me records of you using her money to fund your lifestyle with Clarissa, to pay for Vivian's education, to invest in business ventures that failed. Clarissa's fork clattered against her plate. Elena, that's not fair. That money was used for you. No, I said calmly. It wasn't, and we all know it, but I'm not here to rehash the past. I'm here because Vivian invited me and because I was curious to see if you'd changed. We have changed, my father insisted. We've grown. We've realized what's important. Family is important, Elena. Blood is important. Is it? I asked. Because for the first 26 years of my life, I caught myself. For the first 18 years of my life, it didn't seem like you cared much about blood. or family, or me. That's not true, Clarissa said, her voice rising. We gave you everything, a home, an education, opportunities. You gave me my mother's leftovers, I said. You moved into her studio. You threw away her paintings. You erased her from this house like she'd never existed. And when I tried to honor her memory by pursuing the art she loved, you called it a waste of time. Elena, Vivian said, her voice small. I didn't know. Mom never told me. Of course she didn't, I said, looking at Clarissa. Because that would have complicated the narrative. Poor Clarissa taking in her husband's difficult daughter, sacrificing for a child who wasn't even hers, playing the martyr while spending my mother's money. I think you should leave, my father said, his voice cold. There he was, the man I remembered, the man who'd looked through me for 26 years. I'm not finished, I said. I came here tonight because I wanted to see if you'd changed. If maybe, just maybe, you'd become people capable of genuine feeling, of remorse, of love. I looked around the table at their angry, defensive faces. But you haven't. You're still the same people who neglected a grieving child, who stole her inheritance, who told her she'd never amount to anything. Get out, my father said, standing. Get out of my house. Gladly, I said, standing as well. But before I go, I want you to know something. That exhibition at the Louvre, it's called the Castellanos Collection. It's dedicated to Victoria Castellanos, my mother, the woman whose memory you tried to erase, the woman whose talent you dismissed, the woman whose legacy you tried to steal. I pulled an envelope from my purse and placed it on the table. Those are invitations to the opening, private viewing. You won't be able to get in without them. I wanted you to have them so you could see, really see, what your daughter achieved, what your late wife's teachings created, what your contempt failed to destroy. I headed toward the door, then paused and looked back. Oh, and Dad, remember that night at the Green Gallery? When you called my painting amateur? When you said I had no talent? When you told me I'd never be an artist? I smiled. The 3 paintings the Louvre bought, they're worth more than your entire company, more than you'll make in your lifetime, more than you stole from me. I walked out into the night air, my heart pounding, my hands shaking, my soul singing with triumph. Behind me, I heard shouting, accusations, Clarissa screaming, at my father about money, about lies, about the inheritance she'd thought was his to spend. Let them fight. Let them tear each other apart. I had won. The Louvre exhibition opened on a perfect October evening. Paris was golden in the autumn light, the museum glowing like a jewel. I arrived early, dressed in a custom gown the color of midnight, my mother's paintbrush pendant around my neck. I'd had it retrieved from the pawn shop years ago, had it restored and placed on a new chain. It was my talisman, my reminder. Monsieur Beaumont greeted me warmly. Mademoiselle Castellanos, or should I say, Madame? The press is very excited to finally meet the mysterious V. Castellanos. Just Elena, I said. Tonight, I'm just Elena. He led me through the museum to the contemporary wing, to a room that had been prepared specifically for my work. The walls were painted a soft gray that made the colors in my paintings sing. Strategic lighting highlighted every brushstroke, every detail. And there they were, my 3 paintings, my soul on canvas, Resurrection in Blue, the painting my father had called amateur, now reborn as a masterpiece, the swirling composition, the careful chiaroscuro, the emotional depth, everything he'd failed to see, now vindicated. Mother's legacy, her portrait, capturing her exactly as she'd been, alive, vibrant, loving. The plaque beneath read, Victoria Castellanos, 1965 to 2007, artist and teacher, whose vision lives on through her daughter's work. The weight of inheritance, my meditation on grief, on loss, on the crushing burden of stolen legacy. A girl drowning in gold while her family counts their money, oblivious or uncaring. They're magnificent, Monsieur Beaumont said softly. A perfect trilogy, pain and love and triumph. Thank you, I whispered. Guests began arriving. Critics, collectors, museum directors, members of the press. They circulated through the room, studying the paintings, reading the placards, murmuring appreciatively, and then, impossibly, I saw them. My father, Clarissa, Vivian, they'd come. I watched from across the room as they entered, as they stopped at the threshold and stared at the paintings, watched my father's face pale, watched Clarissa's hands fly to her mouth, watched Vivian pull out her phone, then slowly lower it as if realizing that no Instagram post could capture this moment. They moved toward Resurrection in Blue like sleepwalkers. My father stood before it for a long moment and I saw his lips move. I couldn't hear what he said, but I knew. He was remembering that night at the Green Gallery, the night he'd called this vision amateur, the night he'd tried to destroy my dreams, and now here it was in the Louvre. Validated by one of the most prestigious institutions in the world, worth more money than he'd ever see. They moved to Mother's Legacy and I saw Clarissa flinch, saw her read the plaque, saw her understand that my mother, the woman she'd tried to replace to erase, was being honored, remembered, immortalized. Finally, they reached the weight of inheritance, the girl drowning in gold, the family counting their money. Vivian looked up from the painting and met my eyes across the room. For just a moment, I saw understanding flash across her face, saw her recognize herself in the figures on the shore, saw her realize what I'd done, what I'd survived, what I'd overcome. I walked over to them slowly, savoring each step. Elena, my father said. His voice was hollow. These are everything you said I could never achieve, I finished. Everything you told me I wasn't capable of. Everything you tried to convince me was a waste of time. Clarissa was crying, mascara running down her cheeks. I didn't know, she whispered. I didn't know you were this good. You never asked, I said. You never looked. You were too busy erasing my mother and spending her money. Elena, please, my father said. Let's not do this here. Let's talk privately. I need to. Apologize, I supplied. Make amends? Tell me you're proud? He nodded desperately. I looked at him, really looked at him. At the man who'd called me a failure, who'd stolen my inheritance, who'd tried to destroy my dreams, the man who'd made me feel worthless for 2 lifetimes. And I felt nothing. No anger, no grief, no longing for his approval, just peace. I don't need your apology, I said. But I don't need your pride. I don't need anything from you anymore. I just needed you to see this, to know that you were wrong, to understand that every cruel word, every dismissal, every attempt to break me, it all failed. Elena, my mother taught me that art is truth, I continued, that you put your soul on the canvas. That technique matters, but heart matters more. She gave me everything I needed before she died, and no amount of neglect, no amount of cruelty, no amount of theft could take that away. I turned to include Clarissa and Vivian in my gaze. You tried to erase her, to replace her, to make me forget. But every brushstroke I make is her legacy. Every painting I create is proof that love endures. That truth endures, that art endures. I'm sorry, Vivian whispered. Elena, I'm so sorry. I was just a kid. I didn't understand. No, I agreed. You didn't. But you do now. A photographer approached, asking for a photo. I turned away from my family and smiled for the camera, standing before my paintings, before my triumph, before my vindication. Behind me, I heard them leave, heard their footsteps retreating, heard the door close. I didn't turn around, didn't watch them go. I had better things to do. The exhibition was a massive success. The art world went insane for the mysterious V. Castellanos finally revealing herself, for the tragic backstory of the artist painting in honor of her deceased mother, for the quality of the work itself. Within a week, my prices had tripled. Galleries around the world were calling, begging for pieces. Collectors were offering obscene amounts of money for paintings I'd sold years ago. I took meetings, I sold some pieces, I kept others, and I painted. God, how I painted. Not the controlled, careful works of my 20s, not the technically perfect pieces designed to prove my worth, but wild, emotional, honest paintings. Paintings that showed my rage and my grief and my joy. Paintings that held nothing back. I painted the life I'd lost and the life I'd gained. I painted drowning and resurrection. I painted theft and reclamation. I painted truth. 6 months after the Louvre exhibition, I held my first solo show under my real name, Elena Castellanos, at a major gallery in Manhattan. Every piece sold before the opening. The waiting list for my work was 3 years long. I used the money to establish the Victoria Castellanos Foundation for Young Artists, a grant program for aspiring painters who'd lost a parent, who'd been discouraged, who'd been told they'd never amount to anything. I gave them what my mother had given me: belief, support, resources, hope. And I painted. I bought back my childhood home when my father's business finally collapsed, bought it at auction for half what it was worth, restored my mother's studio, filled it with light and canvas and color. I painted there every day, in the room where she'd taught me, in the space where I'd learned that art was magic. Sometimes when the light hit just right, I could almost feel her presence, could almost hear her voice. "That's it, mija. Put your soul on the canvas. Trust your truth." I did. Every day. Every brushstroke. 5 years after the Louvre exhibition, I received an email from Vivian. Subject: "I understand now, Elena. I know I have no right to contact you. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to tell you something. I'm in therapy. Have been for 2 years now, working through a lot of stuff, understanding a lot of things I was too young and too selfish and too protected to see before. I understand now what Mom did, what Dad did, what they took from you. I understand that I was complicit, even if I was just a kid. That I benefited from your suffering, that I used money that should have been yours, that I mocked something precious because I was taught it had no value. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for a relationship. I'm just asking that you know, I see it now. I see what you survived, what you achieved, what you became despite everything they did to destroy you. You're incredible, Elena. Your mother would be so proud. I wish I'd known her. I wish I'd known you, the real you, not the version Mom and Dad created. I'm sorry. For all of it. For everything. I hope you're happy. I hope you're painting. I hope you're free. Vivian." I read the email 3 times. Then I saved it and closed my laptop. I didn't respond. Maybe someday I would. Maybe not. But I appreciated it. The acknowledgement, the understanding. It didn't change anything. Didn't undo the damage. Didn't erase the past. But it was something. 10 years after my death in my previous life, 15 years after my mother's death in this one, I stood in a gallery in Florence, looking at a painting that had just been unveiled. It was called The Artist's Daughter, and it was a portrait my mother had painted of me when I was 5. A painting I'd thought lost. A painting my father had claimed was destroyed. But here it was, discovered in a storage unit, authenticated, restored. I stared at my 5-year-old self, paint-stained and grinning, brush in hand. Looked at the way my mother had captured the joy on my face, the confidence, the certainty that I could create magic. The placard read, "Victoria Castellanos, The Artist's Daughter, 2002. On loan from the collection of Elena Castellanos, who continues her mother's legacy as one of the most celebrated painters of her generation." I touched the paintbrush pendant at my neck and smiled. "I did it, Mama," I whispered. "I proved them wrong. I made you proud. I remembered you." The painting didn't answer. Paintings never do. But I felt her love radiating from every brushstroke, every color choice, every detail. She'd seen my future even then, had painted me not as I was, but as I would become. An artist, a painter, a truth-teller, someone who took their soul and put it on canvas, someone who made magic. Today, I live in a sunlit apartment in Paris with windows overlooking the Seine. My studio takes up half the space, canvases lining every wall. I paint for 6 hours every morning, then spend my afternoons at the foundation, reviewing applications, mentoring young artists, giving them the support my mother gave me. I never remarried, never had children, never needed to. My paintings are my legacy. My mother's memory is my purpose. My art is my family. Sometimes people ask if I'm lonely, if I regret cutting off my family, if I wish things had been different. I tell them the truth. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. I'm living the life my mother dreamed for me, the life I died trying to achieve, the life I was reborn to claim. My father reached out once, 3 years ago, a letter delivered to the foundation. He was dying, he said. Cancer. He wanted to see me before the end, to make peace. I burned the letter and scattered the ashes in the Seine. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. Clarissa divorced him 2 years after his business collapsed, took what little he had left, and moved to Florida with her sister. I heard she tells people she raised me, that she supported my career, that she always knew I'd be successful. I don't correct the narrative. Let her have her delusions. Vivienne runs a small gallery in Brooklyn now. She features emerging artists, gives them chances, believes in them. She emails me sometimes, always brief, always respectful of boundaries. She's building her own form of redemption. I appreciate the effort. Maybe someday we'll have coffee again, maybe not. And my paintings, they hang in museums around the world. They sell for millions at auction. They're studied and analyzed and celebrated. But my favorites are still the ones that hang in the Victoria Castellanos Foundation. The ones young artists see when they come for their interviews. The ones that show them what's possible. Resurrection in Blue, a copy, not the original. The original is in the Louvre, where it will stay forever. Mother's Legacy, the portrait of my mother, watching over the young artist like she once watched over me. And the weight of inheritance, a reminder that pain can be transformed, that suffering can become art, that drowning girls can learn to swim. Every young artist who receives a grant gets to choose a print of one of these paintings, gets to take home a piece of the story, gets to remember that they're not alone, that someone else survived. That art can save you. That truth endures. Tonight, I'm painting again. Another piece for another exhibition, another truth to tell. I dip my brush and paint the color of my mother's eyes, deep brown with flecks of gold, and begin. The canvas is blank. The possibilities are endless, and somewhere in a museum in Paris, in a gallery in Florence, in a foundation in Manhattan, my paintings hang on walls, silent, permanent, victorious. My father called my work amateur. He said I had no talent. He said I'd never be an artist. The Louvre owns 3 paintings he'll never see because I made sure his invitations were revoked before the exhibition. Security had his photo. He tried to attend anyway. They turned him away at the door. He died 6 months later, never having seen my triumph in person, never having touched the paintings that proved him wrong. And I painted. I paint. I will always paint. Because that's what artists do. We take our pain and our joy and our truth, and we put it on canvas. We create magic. We endure. I dip my brush and paint and smile. This story is over, but the next one is just beginning. And this time, I'm writing the ending.